Hello, Iterative Marketers! Welcome to the Iterative Marketing Podcast, where each week we give marketers and entrepreneurs actionable ideas, techniques, and examples to improve your marketing results. If you want notes and links to the resources discussed on the show, sign up to get them emailed to you each week at iterativemarketing.net. There you'll also find the Iterative Marketing blog and our community LinkedIn group where you can share ideas and ask questions of your fellow iterative marketers. Now let's dive into the show. Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Steve Robinson. I'm your host, and with me as always is the always upbeat and always super smart Elizabeth Aaron. How are you doing today, Elizabeth?
I'm good, Steve. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I realized today that someone asked me what I'm listening to, and I realized, I'm listening to the same stuff that I was listening to last year and the year before when it comes to music, and I was embarrassed to answer the question. So, yeah, what do you listen to?
Oh gosh, I am a huge country fan, so I typically have country music on, unless my husband's in the car, and then we have a shared love for music from the 90s. All those good ones when you growing up, high school kind of reminds you of that era, which I guess I'm dating myself now by saying high school in the 90s. But yeah, so country or 90s, and then when I'm alone and no one else can complain about my music, I love Broadway musicals. Okay. Obsessively love them. So yeah, not always the best person to go on a road trip with.
And other than country, you're victim to the same, listening to the same stuff that I am.
Not a victim. We are lucky to get to tie that part of our life to that amazing music. So I think we're pretty lucky.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about reporting.
Okay. And more specifically, reporting on the results of our marketing efforts, right?
Definitely. And this is something that I am, a topic I'm pretty passionate about. I've written a blog or two about it already. But it's something as a marketer we struggle with. And, having worked in corporate marketing and marketing for a startup, it's something that no matter what industry you seem to be in, it seems to be the same problem across the board. And how do you report on the value that you're adding to the organization?
Yeah, and so many of us fall in the traps of well, I'm not sure what I want to report on, so we're just going to throw a bunch of vanity metrics at this and get that out the door when, that's really selling ourselves and our team's efforts short. It's far better if you can really prove that value up the org chart, because it gets you a lot of things.
It helps, like you said, moving up the org chart and showing the value to the organization. But I think it also helps to show, prove the value to ourselves. And I think as marketers, we've got a gut feeling that what we're doing is working or not working. It feels right or it feels off. We get that feedback from customer surveys and from our executive team, but we don't have any, specific metrics that really say, yes, this is working the way it wants to, or at least a lot of us don't have that. And, if you don't, you're not alone. There's a really awesome study done in 2011, and they found that 69% of marketers that they surveyed felt that their strategies and campaigns were impacting the company's business, but they had no way to prove it. They didn't know how to show that what contribution they were actually making. And so 69%, this is not something that only one of us is experiencing. This is a widespread problem. And so I think that's why it's a really great topic that we're covering today.
Yeah, I think it's also important that we cover it because, we've talked a couple times earlier about the expectations that we set. And if you don't follow through and report on those expectations, specifically, expectations around continuous improvement and why we start small and other things like that, then you really aren't following through on your promise. And part of the goal of iterative marketing as a practice is to really establish that credibility of marketing as a force within the organization.
And it's our ability to demonstrate that we're either meeting or exceeding the objectives that have been set for us.
And we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that if you do a really good job of reporting, that usually you're rewarded with more budget and more resources. And budget and resources means that you can do a lot more. And so we all struggle when it comes to budget season. In getting those resources by effectively reporting, you set yourself up for success there.
That definitely makes the conversation a lot easier.
So what do we report when we go and do this reporting? Because vanity metrics don't cut it, but if we're not going to report on the number of likes that we have on Facebook, what are we going to talk about?
Well, I think there's four separate areas we want to report on, and the first one is the ever elusive ROI. And really, what we're looking here is to get as close to tying our direct investment back to revenue as we can.
Yeah, and that's projected revenue, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then the second thing is not all of our activities are really tied to revenue. Some of them are setting ourselves up for future success, and so we also want to report on the assets that we build, the things that we're banking that we're going to be able to draw from in the future, right?
And this is important because it sets us up for that future success. Yes, we're tasked with performance now, but we also need to make sure that the company is poised to be successful in the future as well.
And then it wouldn't be iterative marketing if we weren't iterating and improving. And so if we're making things better, we want to show folks that we're making things better. So we want to report on the improvements that we're making. And then the fourth component, the fourth thing that we really want to talk about in our reports is the insights that we're generating, because if we're doing a good job of setting up experiments, like we talked about in past episodes, we're not just improving the results, but we're also generating insights that can be applied elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Elsewhere, like the personas and customer journeys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we should take these four topics: ROI, assets, improvements, and insights, and talk about them individually. We'll take them in order and start with ROI.
That's great. And I think it's a good place to start because, again, this is one of the leading concerns of or frustrations of marketers. In fact, when you look at industry surveys and data, it appears to continuously be in the top 2 or top 3 concerns of showing ROI or proving ROI to their executive team or C-suite. And I think it's important to ask, why is it such a frustration? Why are we having such a hard time, or why is it bothering us? And I think that the answer is because it's hard to do. And when we start to look at why it's so hard to do, 2 kind of themes come out. And the first is that not every marketing activity can be attributed to a specific purchase or a new client.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other problem is that is a matter of timing, right? Because if you engage in some marketing activity today, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 6 months, a year, 2 years in the future before you actually reap the benefit. We've done some work with clients who serve the aerospace industry, and it's notorious for crazy long buying cycles of 12, 18 months. And so if you think about it, if you're a manufacturer servicing that industry, you're launching a new product. All of the marketing goes out for that new product before the first widget hits the production floor, right? So you have your marketing, you have your sales cycle, which is that crazy long 12, 18 months. Now you have to produce the product. You produce the product, you ship it, you get it out the door, you invoice for it, and then you have to wait to get paid on those invoices. All of that happens before a single dollar comes back from the marketing effort that you put into the beginning of that product launch. So you can't just rely on that trailing indicator to get to of revenue to get to whether or not what you're doing is working.
Well, you just outlined sort of a process, a lengthy process. So not only do you have the timeline issue, but you mentioned, marketing activities. There's more than one thing that has been done over this 6-month or 12-month or 18-month period. And so it also becomes an issue of attribution and which of our marketing activities contributed to the sale and what was their impact on that, what percentage, what extent did each activity contribute. And so trying to tie that back to revenue presents an entirely different problem.
Yeah. And so how do we get around this? What's the solution if we can't just take the dollars that are coming in and immediately, lay claim that was marketing? We did that. Yay.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And there's 2 ways that we can look at this. There's sort of 2 indicators in terms of what it is that we've contributed. And there's leading versus trailing. Trailing is kind of this obvious one that we're talking about. It's the revenue, it's the return on investment. But as we've just finished discussing, that's complicated. There's a number of issues why this isn't just a straightforward thing that we're able to report on. And so when you are in that situation, you've got a long lead time, you've got a lot of different marketing activities in your sales process. What's another way that we can try and figure out what it is that we're contributing and how our programs are impacting the company's performance?
Yeah, and that's really where you want to look at leading indicators. So these are the metrics that you can measure that indicate future success in revenue. and then determine what that correlation is. So examples of leading indicators, or KPIs as we commonly call them, are things like the number of appointments that you've booked, the number of leads that you've gotten in, free trials for software or demonstrations or downloads. There's specific actions that occur earlier in the sales cycle, earlier in that customer journey, that you know that if you get X number of these in, you're going to get Y number of dollars out.
And I think it's important to talk about the fact that on their own, they don't necessarily, you can't just take them on their own. You have to put them into a little bit of context and understand what their relationship is to future revenue. And so, if you say you have 15 free trial requests, what does that translate to 6 months down the road?
Right. And in order to do that, you have to be able to understand what that relationship is. If you have a good KPI, it's directly proportional. You increase the number of free trial requests, you increase the amount of money coming out, but you have to know the math behind that. And so to do that, you have to analyze everything going backwards for a period of time and understand exactly what that relationship is. And that can be hard, but in most companies, it's doable if you have a leading indicator to be able to track that back in a direct relationship to revenue.
And I think, this is, like you said, it can be hard, but Heather Ullman wrote a fabulous blog post on this, on the relationship between KPIs and revenue. And I believe we'll link to this in the show notes. And I definitely recommend checking that out.
Great. Well, I think this is a great time for us to break and talk about how we can go help some people. When we get back, we'll hit on the other 3 areas of reporting.
Before we continue, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask you iterative marketers a small but meaningful favor and give a few dollars to a charity that's important to one of our own. This week's charitable cause was submitted by Bostic Industrial, who asks that you make a donation to United Way and help support nearly 800 communities across more than 40 countries and territories worldwide to create community solutions that improve education, financial stability, and health. Learn more at www.unitedway.org. or visit the link in the show notes. If you would like to submit your cause for consideration for our next podcast, please visit iterativemarketing.net/podcast and click the Share a Cause button. We want to support what's important to you.
And we're back. So before the break, we talked about one of the 4 key areas for reporting return on investment, really tying your marketing activity directly back to dollars. But there's 3 more that we want to talk about. And the second one is actually a great contrast to that ROI that we were talking about earlier, because not every dollar you invest is going to immediately come back in return of additional revenue. Sometimes you're investing in future success for the marketing organization.
And I think this is important here because, again, we mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but, we're tasked with producing results, and we need to do that now, but we also need to set the company up for success. And that is what these long-term assets are doing.
Exactly. It's kind of like if you were to, a great analogy is a factory. If you own a factory, you spend money on raw materials, and the amount of money that you spend on raw materials is pretty much directly proportional to the amount of stuff that your factory produces. You buy more materials, you produce more stuff. But that's not the only investment that you make in your factory. You also buy machinery. And if you make an investment in your machinery, that money out isn't going to immediately come back as more stuff out. It's an investment in more efficient production of stuff in the future. And in marketing, our raw materials are the ads that we're producing, the content we're producing, and then the spend that gets it out there to distribute it. We produce more content, we spend more money to get it out there. That should have a direct correlation on revenue. But the investments that we make that are going to be a little bit more long-term investments include things like, our machinery, include things like the database that we build up of known prospects, the cookie pools that we build up if we're doing a lot of first-party targeting of how we can better target our ads in the future. Our brand, the goodwill of our brand, is something that we build up over time, and making huge investments in the goodwill of our brand is not going to equate to immediate sales.
I love this example because I think it really helps to put into context, what it is we're talking about, that not all of our marketing activities are necessarily expenses. Some of these are long-term investments, and they are vital to the success of our company and our business and our future sales. And so I love that you've been able to tie this back to kind of that factory example. And really it comes it comes back to, reporting on the assets. We are able to demonstrate our progress in developing these long-term investments that, like you said earlier, may not be producing results today, but again, are setting us up for future success. And I think you wrote a great blog post about this, and I think the show notes will provide a link, but it's another read. Apparently, we're assigning a lot of extra reading in this podcast.
Yeah, and a lot of marketers have a tendency to not report on this. We're all making these investments, but by not reporting on it, you're missing a key component of where the budget's going. And if those making budget decisions or having the opportunity to impact your budget decisions don't understand where the money's going, then that can hurt you in the future. So it's important to prove that you are setting yourself up for future success, and that, hey, this is where we're investing, right? This is where some of this money's going.
I think a third area that we can report on, and I think a lot of times as marketers, we have a tendency to overlook are improvements. And we talked about optimizations a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about setting expectations with the C-suite of, starting small and continuously improving. And it's important to report on those improvements because it shows that we're adding value to the organization. And it's not just showing that we're adding value, we are actually adding value to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a couple of different types of ways. There's a couple of different ways we can show that we're making improvements. One is to simply document the improvements that we're making. So what optimizations did we make based on the data that we got from our experiments? That's valuable in and of itself. But then also making sure that as we're reporting on the numbers, on the ROI, on the metrics, that we're showing the changes in those over time. Because if you let a metric stand on its own, it doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. You've got to have something to compare it to. If I tell you that I produced 100 leads at $50 a lead, is that good? Is that bad? You really don't have anything to compare it to. But if I tell you that the month before that we had produced 90 leads at $75 a lead, well, now I've shown that there's been an improvement. And so even without a direct connection to revenue, this is still a good thing. And it shows that I'm moving in the right direction and I'm not just standing still with my marketing efforts and my marketing spend.
Speaking of not standing still, the fourth component is not only the improvements you make, but the insights that you generate along the way. And we talked about this in the optimizations podcast. We harped on it again in the experiments. But if you're producing quality, thoughtful experiments, those experiments don't just tell you what color your buttons should be. They tell you more about the personas that you're targeting and the journeys that those personas are following along the buying process.
This is one of my favorite parts. I feel like I say that a lot though, so I don't know if I can be held accountable to it, but I love insights because this is kind of our secret weapon as marketers. We want to get inside the heads of our target audience, and insights is our ability to do that. And so kind of taking a look at the designing thoughtful experiments and how that can be applied across the entire organization. I think, let's give an example. And if you're looking at a lawn care company, and you've identified two personas. You've got an elderly gentleman named Earl and an affluent guy named Andy. And we're running some tests to try and figure out, what sort of messaging resonates best with them. Well, we run an experiment and we find out that being on time, we run an ad that focuses on timeliness and being on time. And we find that it really resonates with Earl. This is the ad that he has clicked on over and over and over again. This is the one he's responding to. Well, not only have we now figured out what is our most effective form of advertising for banner ads, which can then be applied over to traditional advertising, but we've also figured out that this is something that Earl really values. I've renamed him already, but he really values. Well, now this is something that we can help to put in as part of our company culture, and this is part of our service, promise that we're making to our customers. And so it's something that not only are we advertising, but then we're following through. And so we're maintaining consistency across the brand. And that's really important.
Yeah, and if you take the time to report these insights up, they have an opportunity to then get transferred over to other parts of the company, whether it's the sales team, so the sales team knows what promises they should make, whether that's R&D, so they know what kind of products or services need to be developed next, customer service, what's really important to these people. These insights are applicable, in multiple different places. And going with our theme of linking in the show notes here, I know Heather wrote a great post on iterativemarketing.net on how to really get these insights out of your experiments, and we will link to that in the show notes as well.
So those are sort of the 4 ways that we can report. But I think, before kind of to wrap this up, there's one other thing we want to talk about, and that comes down to regular reporting and consistency, and that's really key. By regularly demonstrating that we're producing more with the same investment, we are going to get access to those larger budgets, that we talked about earlier when we first started the podcast. And we're going to have more opportunities to promote marketing as a driving force within the organization, which ultimately increases our value to the C-suite and the powers that be and the ones that are making decisions about our future. And so it's really exciting, but the key is that it has to be regular.
Mm-hmm. If you want to learn more about these 4 different areas of reporting, ROI, assets, improvements, and insights, Elizabeth, my co-host here, wrote a great post on iterative-marketing.net that we will link to, and you can read through this again and apply it in the next time that you produce a report. I should note that this pretty much rounds out our podcasts on the 6 actionable components. So in episodes 2 through 8, we covered brand. We covered defining your brand, your persona discovery, journey mapping, aligning your content and your channels with your journeys and your personas. We talked about experiment and optimization. And then this week being the last one, we talked about reporting and feedback. So next week, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. And because we know all of you marketers out there, you're not sitting still just waiting for the day to apply iterative marketing. You've got a lot going on right now. So we're going to circle back and say, how do you start applying this stuff today in a marketing organization that already has a bunch of moving parts, where you already have goals and objectives that you're trying to attack? We're gonna bring it back down to some things you can start doing today. So with that, until next week, hope to see you soon.
Thanks. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast directory. If you want notes and links to resources discussed on the show, sign up to get them emailed to you each week at iterative-marketing.net. There, you'll also find the Iterative Marketing blog and our community LinkedIn group, where you can share ideas and ask questions of your fellow iterative marketers. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our username is @ITER8IVE, or email us at podcast@iterative-marketing.net. The Iterative Marketing Podcast is a production of Brilliant Metrics, a consultancy helping brands and agencies rid the world of marketing waste. Our producer is Heather Ullman, with transcription assistance from Emily Bechtel. Our music is by Seastock Audio Music Production and Sound Design. You can check them out at seastockaudio.com. We'll see you next week. Until then, onward and upward.